Welcome back to This Is Working. I'm Dan Roth, editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. On this show, we offer the leaders of today an opportunity to share their knowledge with the leaders of tomorrow. Today, my guest is Oscar Munoz, former CEO of United Airlines. Oscar Munoz stepped into the role of United Airlines CEO in 2015. It was one of the airline's most turbulent times. Contentious labor disputes were hurting employee morale and in turn endangering the airline's overall effectiveness. Among the legacy carriers, United ranked at the bottom of customer satisfaction. Then came Oscar. In 5 years at the helm, Munoz systematically tackled each issue and rebuilt customer support. In his soon-to-be-released memoir, Turnaround Time, Oscar shares valuable lessons on communicating empathy, being transparent, and uniting a workforce. Oscar, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Oh, thank you. And I have to say, it's great being in the studio. And I was an early adopter of LinkedIn. I was trying to remember when I first wrote my first post and seeing the amazing sort of reaction that you had across your network. And it's like, this is powerful, right? This is a long time ago before all of this was normally accepted practice. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, I think that you are, and we'll talk about this in the interview, but you were someone who really believed in the importance of communicating, not just to the world, but to your employees. And I think that you really used some of your early posts as a way to tell people who work for United where you intended to go. So we're going to get into that. But before we do, I would love to just talk a little bit about your path to becoming CEO. If you look back to where you came from, immigrating to the US at 8, going to USC, not really being sure even what college was for or why you should go to college, I don't think people would have predicted that you would have become a CEO, rise to the top of the corporate world. Can you both talk a little bit about your background, and then is there anything that you use from your background as when you were a CEO? Was there anything that you relied on or that you brought back up to help you as you were leading these massive companies?
Of course there is, right? Our formative years define who we are, in my opinion. There's a great quote from Tennyson on Ulysses that I am parts of all that I've met. And it couldn't be truer for me because my immigrant story, while dramatic and wonderful to tell, it is one of millions of stories in this great country. So the emphasis was certainly there, but it was the people along the way. I talk about my maternal grandmother and her course in hand that I held walking through dusty roads in Mexico when I was with her by myself as my mom had come to the United States to sort of make a life for us. And so you have that background, and then coming to the States, without knowledge of the language or the culture. And at a young age, you pick it up fairly quickly. I think the concept of familia in Spanish, obviously it means family, but it's like most cultures, it's such a deeply rooted emotional connection that really got me through a lot of things. The times with my grandmother in Mexico, going from home to home, coming to different new environments here in America, and just having a welcoming embrace really gave me the support. The formative years, I was always confident about what I was doing. I always felt I had enough to do. I did not and was not aware of what education could provide you from a life perspective. I certainly wasn't aware of college. I have a famous story where a high school counselor catches me in the hallway and says, "Hey, where are you thinking of going to college?" And my honest answer was like, what's a college? And people laugh, "Oh, you're making it." It's like, I'm not. And that's the thing I think with diversity in America. People don't quite understand that the avenues that most of us are afforded are not necessarily obvious to the underrepresented minorities. It's like, how could someone not know about college? You would be amazed at how many people just don't either know of the avenue, but it's like, that's not for you, son or daughter, because that requires money. That's only for, which is not the case, right? And so this is the concept of me, of the people that I've met along the way that have really helped me. And so the journey to be CEO, it was the advice I give, and I give a lot of it in different areas, and we don't have time enough to cover all of that. But there's an effort, for minorities, there's an African-American, the first pilot at United as African-American, who has this great quote that I always said, he grew up in Alabama during that era. And he said, you learn as a child that you have to work twice as hard to get half as far. And that was always very telling. And that's the advice I give. Listen, it is unfair. There's bias in it. There's no all that. But you can whine, you can complain, or you know what? You can just bear down, work your ass off, do the right things. You asked about my heritage and upbringing and how it reflects everything I do. my genuine outreach to people, how I connect with people, how I aim to build bridges, how I don't tear things down, how I don't attack and I don't blame. Those are all formative trainings from parents and family along the way. And that's the way I lead. That's not for necessarily everyone. But from a work effort, it's always a collaborative one and bringing everyone involved. And it didn't come intuitively to me.
Hmm.
Initially in my life, especially in my work life, being a Mexican American in finance, there was it was like, well, what is this person? You didn't feel like you belonged. So I over indexed on the serious nature and over controlling. It's like nothing's getting, this all is going to reflect on me and my heritage. And it took a couple, seminal moments of my personal life, my mom passing and all that, that just got me to slow my ass down. And I call it swing easy as an advice aspect of it. If you play golf or tennis, right, you watch the pros and it's just so smooth and easy, right? And then we get out there and hack it around and, don't get near it. And so from a career perspective, how you approach that work life, that concept of swinging easy means be yourself, know who you are, be that self, involve people around you for the things that you're not good at. And you would be amazed. My career trajectory, as nice as it was before I made this swing easy sort of methodology change, the trajectory was exponential after that because, two heads, three heads, 10 heads are always better than one. So, work around the folks that know yourself. And for most part, just, the concept of bridging gaps and building fact-based decisions and all the things that you hear about. But predominantly what I tell leaders is to listen, learn, and only then can you really lead. And people say, yeah, whatever. It's like listening, really listening is not an easy thing. You think you are. You walk in, it's like, yeah, I heard him. Yeah, I talked to him. Yeah, I talked to a bunch of people. It's like, no, did you genuinely connect with people so they felt that connection? I always say, about leadership, the broader topic, how do you define it? I don't define it. It's too hard. There's too many books. The way I use it is that leadership is never, never about you. It's about the people you lead and how they are impacted by the words and actions you say, because that's what they believe. And that leads to my next promise, which is proof, not promise, right? We have filled in this world with people with promise, but where's the proof? Where does it mean? When you say you're going to do something, did you actually really do it? So that causes that's a wide arc of conversation there, but it's these things you learn along the way. And most of all, you learn from experience, right? The things you know today versus what we knew in our younger self. You do wish you knew then what you know now. And the interesting for your younger listeners and viewers, you can know what you're going to know because there's a lot of people around you if you just let them in. You don't have to listen to everyone says, but experience does count. And I think we learn it as we get more experience. So a broad array of things.
Yeah.
But
and is there someone who taught you to go from being, when you made that transition from being controlling and being serious to swinging easy, I know that your mother's death had an impact and maybe helped you see the importance of taking it back a step. But was there anyone at work who also said to you, Oscar, you're too hard charging, you are too focused, smile, or don't be as controlling? How did you make that jump at work?
So the swing easy intervention that we'll talk about was later. The first one ever is when I made a jump from I was a big young hotshot at Pepsi, and I got a role at Coke. And it was a two-level jump in my career. I'm 26, 27 years old. And so I'm feeling pretty good about myself. And I go to this new company who I don't know any, but I'm now the boss in a lot of ways. And of course, Coke and Pepsi cultures are about as different as the city of New York here and the city of Atlanta. And for all of you that's travel, you know the difference. You know what I'm talking. So I walk into the Coke environment. People are generally older, a little bit slower paced. And for someone like me at my age, coming from this hard charging world of Pepsi, I'm like, I call it all asses and elbows. It's like, it's like these people. Oh my God, what are we going to? And in my sort of transition, there was my boss at the time, sits me down, gives you kind of a midterm performance review sort of thing. And we talk about all the things I'm doing, and it's all great stuff, and I'm feeling good. And he closes sort of the book. I remember the visual of him closing the sort of the HR concept. He pushes it aside, and he said, "If you have a few minutes, maybe we and I can talk something about more about on a personal side." And I'm like, oh, it's like I think he wants me to date his daughter, or some arrogant thought of that nature. And what he said sticks with me to this day. He said, you're really good. You've exceeded our expectations, but you're not yet as good as you think you are. And I remember thinking, it's like, wait, that didn't sound like a compliment. But what it meant, obviously, is like, listen, slow your roll in today's parlance. Let people in. And I adopted that and began to see the people that I thought were older and maybe it's like the woman that I thought looked like my grandmother. Was a Harvard MBA. 20 some years ago, but
Right.
nevertheless, I didn't have a Harvard MBA, and so I began to basically not judge a book by its cover. So interventions along the way for
Hmm.
sure, and of course my mom passing. It was just as you get more serious in your life, you realize it's like, what am I doing? Why am I working so hard to be someone else at work, to pretend that I'm this or that I don't, like there's nothing I don't know. And it's in all this process of the book launch, I've heard such wonderful advice. One of them is that trust travels at the speed of vulnerability. And I didn't know those terms then, but I knew to say, if you and I work together and I walk in and say, hey, Dan, how's your weekend? Hey, we got this project. How do we want to do this kind of thing? I wouldn't do those things because I felt the need to control my outcome, and then learn that trusting other smart people makes it such a better product. So that's input and advice for people. Take all the little portions that you can, but it's important to be yourself and human for
That's
sure.
amazing. I'd love to talk a little bit about a point in your book, which I think is really the crux of the book, where you make a decision to focus on the employees at United. And just to set the stage, you came into a company that was really in disarray. It merged with Continental, purchased Continental 5 years earlier, but never really merged. You say in the book, it was a merger on paper, but not in practice. The employees couldn't fly on each other, or people, I guess, pilots and flight attendants couldn't fly in each other's planes. There were fights with the unions. There were fights with Wall Street. The culture was bad. There were a million things you could have decided to focus on to try to fix. And you made the decision that United was going to focus on employees. And you couldn't fix anything else without focusing on the employees first. Can you talk a little bit about that meeting where you sat down with your senior management and came to that conclusion? And I got two questions for you on that. One is, how did you build consensus on it? And then two is, why were you so sure that fixing the employee problem or making employees love United was the heart of the issue?
It's very insightful questions. The second part of your question is how did I know, sort of thing. And so that dates back all the way. So what you just outlined was the culmination of a process that took quite a bit of time. The initial thought, to your point, there was many things broken. And in a company that requires a turnaround, there's never a shortage of things to fix, right? That's why it's broken.
Right.
So which one you focus on first is probably one of the greatest experienced leadership lessons I can give you. You've got to figure out a way to determine what that first big thing is. Because if you start on the wrong thing, it's just not going to work. And what that was, I did not know. I had lots of information, lots of feedback from everyone, but my sixth sense, my upbringing, my learning from Swing Easy back in the day was, you know what, before I jump into some, strategic sort of conversation and speeches and presentations, I'm going to first listen to who I know is not happy, is our frontline employees. And I knew that because the concept of listening and engaging with humans, when you meet someone, you can tell if they're genuine, happy and excited, or I could tell in my visits with employees, as happy and wonderful and elated they seem to be, there was this something sort of brewing in the back that held on to me just a little longer, that almost said, not to be dramatic, but help me, help us. So I knew something was up in that regard. So I went on a listening tour, and during that process, there's a lot of stories in that section about how I finally came to the things like, oh my God, I get this. I now know what it is, because it was confusing. You get lots of information, additional information from people, but it took a flight attendant who I approached, and she was reluctant to talk. And then she finally, in an emotional outburst of both tears and somewhat anger, said, you know what, Oscar, I'm just tired of always having to say, I'm sorry. And it just crystallized because I'd heard so many things. It's like, there it is. We've put people in a position where they have to deliver a service, deliver products that they have nothing to do with. So I am sorry you don't like your coffee. I am sorry we're late, right? A flight attendant has nothing to do with either one. And there's no quicker way to disengage or disenfranchise or disillusion a human being that I have to do this job I have no control over. I'm just a machine. So you know what? I'm going to deliver the service in that way. Here's your stuff. You know, I think if you want to complain, call someone else. So I knew all of that. Um, but then I had to build consensus. I had to go get to my senior team because they had a lot of ideas. And of course, my board, and then inevitably Wall Street, because the concept of regaining the trust of all your employees, which was the final outcome and consensus in the team, doesn't fly well in a world where it's like, wait, what does that mean?
Right, you
That,
can't measure it. There's no way
well,
to
you
know
can
it.
measure it because the way they're going to measure it is, oh, that's going to cost money, right? He's going to give away the farm and he's going to take everybody. He's going to be, I think I was called Santa Claus at one point in time. And so the consensus building is a longer story because I had to take a little health break, and I came back from that. And on the day of me going back to the hospital for a heart transplant is the day that our conversations culminated. Strategic conversations about what to focus on first all came together on that morning as I knew I was headed that afternoon to the transplant. So the story is almost overly
So
dramatic, but you know, you can corroborate with many people. That's the way the timing happened. And then consensus was, again, engaging in this concept of listen and learn. Let everybody have their say. Why do you think that? Going back and
Yeah, but you listen and learn, but you also had an idea. You knew where you wanted this to end up.
Yeah.
So how do you take something, how do you go into a meeting where you're listening and learning, but also persuading?
Yeah. I think the fact that they all knew what I had gone through, and they knew nobody had traveled the way I did before I went out with my illness. I was in the middle of the night. You know, in a company, what travels faster than any meeting conversation is the word of you as a friend and me as a friend. It's like, hey, did you see Dan's, you know, he came by last night and says hi to me. Your view of that conversation is more important to me than whatever anyone can write, because it's like a friend of mine said, you know what, he's not a bad guy. So my team knew that I'd been out there. I had not talked about the situation because I was out a little ill. And so what I was able to do in a lot of those conversations, like, that's great. Now, what's the platform of that? What do our people have to do around that? Well, they're going to, you know, and it just became crystallizing moments. So it does take some deftness and some socialization and some coercing and diverting, but it wasn't overt. I mean, my most senior people, my head of technology, my head of operations, who have the most to gain and lose from anything, all came to the same conclusion. And their two voices piping up for this regaining trust was by far the loudest in the room, because they know from now, they knew kind of that I had that inclination, but to have two people that involved. And so the team coalesced right before I left at lunch to go get my transplant.
To get a heart transplant. Incredible. Want to give some shout outs to people on the stream who are tuning in. You have Mia from Bangladesh, Lisa from Washington, Charles from Hong Kong. Members are really resonating with some of the phrases you have used. Tanya says, listen, learn, lead is later. She loves this. Refugio says, I share your empathy and knowledge to listen, learn, and value others. And Fatima says, trust travels at the speed of vulnerability. Wow. So a lot of people are getting a lot of good takeaways from this. I want to ask you about another very tough time from when you were CEO, which was Flight 3411.
There's many tough times. I'm like, yeah, which one of many?
Exactly. This was the flight from Chicago to Louisville, Kentucky, where a doctor was pulled off board by law enforcement. United needed seats to get other people to Louisville, and no one was volunteering to, or not enough people had volunteered. And this video of this doctor being bloodily pulled down the aisle went viral, and you had to do something about it. Can you talk a little bit about your reaction and what you have learned from that reaction, or what other people should learn from your reaction?
So a host of things. Not one of my best moments from a communication perspective, as one who loves to storytell and communicate and listen. So facts first. This was early on, this whole social media thing.
Right.
Even though it was 2017, which just seems like yesterday, we've been researching, we might have been the first viral global brand to be virally hit by something like this.
Yeah.
So the response that we made, or people made on my behalf on Twitter, was, didn't think it was going to go really far. There was a word used in the initial phrasing by a staff member that people were worried about. So let's change that. So we used the term, and I approved the term, just to be fair, of reaccommodated versus overbooking, because overbooking is a verboten word in our world via regulatory issues. And again, if I had sat the learning and watched that video until I literally got sick to my stomach, along with my team, we would have never used that word. I would have never used that word. So first failing is understand the facts, the detail. No, understand the details and watch it. What's relevant is how people feel. Back to leadership. Not about you. It's that. But I got caught up in the facts. The doctor was not an upstanding citizen, and he fought the Chicago police, and there was no real United employees engaged. It was United Express, which is a different airline. The pilots that were trying to get on were not, part of the United team.
But to your point, it doesn't matter. People were watching this. They don't know they don't
Right,
care about
right.
any of that. They're just seeing
And so
this.
all those facts, and on the first day, I was defending our employees because it's like, this is a person that we run into these issues all the time. And of course, that just fueled the fire even more. The doctor said he was Chinese, so we've got between 400 and 800 million views. I get different numbers on Weibo in China, so I became globally infamous really quickly. The second lesson is it is never, never too late to do the right thing.
Wow.
So the next day was spent trying to, oh my gosh, this is a disaster, and calling the board and trying to figure out what we do. And then a decision was made that I had to go on live on TV on Good Morning America, of all things. So it's like, yeah, no, we should. And then I spent a few hours sort of being guided and coached. How do you effectively tell the story that, it really wasn't United? It was, all that thing we just discussed. And your sense is immediate. It's like, nobody's going to care. And I'm going to sound like every other, picture of every other CEO who has talked about, gee, I wish I had a vacation now with, those sorts of things. And back to my upbringing and how I was raised. The middle of the night, I wake up and I fall to my knees. I get on my knees. Not an overly pious person, but I look. It's like, gosh. And my grandmother came to my view, and it made me think about her approach. She never complained. She never, she helped others. She never pointed the finger. And it's like that's who I became. And the thought of getting on national TV with tens of millions of viewers and beginning to sort of this spin thing, forgetting how it might look or whatever, it just didn't sound. And I kind of had a sense that I would have to talk about this for the rest of my life, just like we are today. And to tell you, well, no, you don't understand, Dan, is this. So I went sort of rogue. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say. But when she confronted him with the obvious question, I said it was a horrific thing. And I let policies and procedures that we have in our industry get in the way of doing what's right for another human being. And for that, I am sorry, we're sorry, we're going to do lots of things about it. And the audible gasp in her ear from her producers, they're just loaded from there, right? They can't wait to get another CEO. And then the louder gasp was from my team behind me. It was like, wait, he's not supposed to say that. But in my mind, it was the right thing to do. And it was difficult, not because you take the blame and the buck stops here, because it was it's like, listen, no one's going to listen to anything else. We're going to put this to rest. And I've paid for it ever since, because a lot of my employees were very upset. Like, what the hell?
Interesting.
Why would you say that? We didn't have it. Why wouldn't you tell the world? Because the world's not listening, because I screwed it up early on. And once you do that, but again, back to the phrase is that it's never too late to do the right thing, came to me. And to this day, all the big business schools initially would write about this awful way of communicating, and now it's evolved to, hey, what a great recovery and a mechanism for people to learn. So that's the learning, and that's why I never mind talking about it, because I think a lot of people that are listening will get to this point. You and all of you out there will face a point where you have a decision, maybe not of this ilk or whatever, where there's no book, there's no template. It's what is the right thing that you feel should be done for your organization, for your team, for yourself. And then you're going to have to make that decision. So prepare yourself. You will face it, and how you face it and how you do it will be meaningful, for the rest of your leadership style, leadership process.
And we have a few more minutes left. Want to talk about you. You talked about your health crisis as you were CEO, heart attack followed by the need for a heart transplant. Did that make you more empathetic or give you a different understanding of people who go through health issues at work? What kind of lessons would you say there are for people who are either dealing with health crises themselves and they're maybe not sure how to talk to their company about it? They're afraid they're going to get in trouble. Or what would you say also to leaders who have people and they're like, you just got to work. I don't know. I don't want to deal with keep your health problems are your own. We got to get through. We have to make the numbers.
I think I've always been an empathetic person to understand people's personal situations. I think that comes from a heritage and upbringing where you're around people that are constantly in some sort of need. So I've always had that. An organ transplant doesn't change who you are, doesn't make you more or less of anything. Um, Empathy is wonderful. I was I was on life support and all of the, and so I was in a medically induced coma. Coming out of it with all your hormonal imbalances and drug scourging through you, I think I can comprehend mental illness
Hmm.
a little bit more because I truly believed things my mind was telling me. And as one of my nurses, no, you were crazy like everyone, but your ability to convince me was off the charts. And so I have a little bit more understanding of how chemical imbalance can really alter reality, for lack of a better term. And I think the other thing is, kind of this mind over body thing. I never once thought I was in any kind of peril or danger. I never once questioned the fact that I was going to come back to work. I mean, as it was me, I was like, hey, bring the board in here, let them see me. Dan, the pictures from me coming out of the coma would chill you. I looked like death. It was awful. And if anybody had seen me outside of my immediate family, they would have run for the hills because I looked that ill. But again, the mind is a wonderful thing. I just, let's go, come on. And then we just got through it. A little daunting when someone says, we're going to take your heart and we're going to remove it and then put somebody else's in. You're like, no, that's a big no for me. Okay.
And then finally, I just want to talk a little bit about you picking your successor. You went through really early on into your CEO tenure. You had somebody under you who was very clearly the successor. Are there lessons there for other people who are thinking about, should everyone think about who their successor is? Should all just senior leaders? And then how do you do it without also wondering, like, this guy's like gunning for my job, I got to get out of the way? I mean, aren't you just putting a end date on your time in that position?
That's the difficult part for sure, and it's hard for people to follow. But back to my concept of leadership is never about you, but the people that you lead. What is your role as a leader? What is your role as a board? Succession planning is everything, and you should have smooth transitions. United had gone through 5 or 6 CEOs in the previous decade, and that is just shattering to morale and direction of a company, right? Different people, even if they're even somewhat think alike, it's just, you're going left and right. So people learn to say, you know what, I don't listen to any of that sort of stuff. So I knew transition at some point in time was great. I know a lot about myself and what I am good at. And I also know that I did not have the 20 plus years of experience of my eventual successor and how I needed that knowledge base around me combined to really set, because regaining the trust of our employees was the platform. Touchy-feely stuff doesn't make you valuable as a company, doesn't get you to write books, doesn't it's like you have to run the business. So there's that hard edge side of it. So finding the right team that can begin to build on the platform of greater employee engagement and be able to grow and be profitable and all the things that United is doing today is all based on the premise of our employees. And so the lesson is, yeah, you know what? You got to know when the time is, and that is the hardest thing to do because it's the sword of Damocles, right? You're sitting there. It's like, yeah, I know he's gonna, I brought him in and we coached and guided and all that sort of stuff. And at the right time, it was the time to do it. And of course, COVID hit at the same time, which was interesting. But we worked very nicely together and worked that. But yeah, it's a tough one. Everything you said is true. And it's not for everyone. It's easy for me to say in hindsight, but I did feel some, oh, geez, I wouldn't mind staying for a little bit longer, or those things go through your head to some degree, but it was the right thing to do when at the right time.
Well, Oscar, thank you so much for joining us here today. This was terrific. We've released each episode of This Is Working as a podcast. You can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts, and you can get more advice from the world's top leaders by subscribing to my newsletter using the link you see on the screen. I'm Dan Roth. Thanks for watching. This is Working.